Ora abbiamo in linea sull'internet via Zoom Emily Scivetti, con cui parleremo della sua esperienza professionale e la sua italianità. Well, buongiorno Emily, thank you for coming on to Radio Italia 1.
Buongiorno, Antonio.
Okay,
I'm very happy to be here.
good. So we'll continue in Italian.
Well, I can't speak Italian. This
Okay.
is
Emily is the CEO of a company called Oceanics, and which has some very interesting input or work around the renewables sector. So maybe I'll just let Emily explain, tell us, the listeners, what Oceanics does, and if I'm saying it correctly, because you have quite a substantial background history in the renewables sector.
so OceanX Energy is a developer of offshore wind technology and projects. Right. And so we are pioneering floating foundation projects off the coast of New South Wales and are developing offshore wind projects off the coast of Australia. And that means that we can provide and generate lots of electricity with wind that are located 10, 20, 30 kilometres off the coast.
Lots of energy. So are these areas that have a lot of wind, or is it just generally out in the oceans we can have wind blowing fairly constantly?
We have very strong wind resources off the coast of Australia, mainly around the roaring 40s and up the east coast of New South Wales. We also have some really great wind around the Eden coast and, of course, off the coast of Gippsland in Victoria. And the wind offshore blows at different times than onshore. So it means that offshore wind can create what we call a generation profile, which complements onshore renewables. So when the sun sets in the evening, the offshore wind really kicks up and we can provide bulk electricity at the times that we need it most.
So this might begin to answer one of the apparent problems with renewable energy, is that it's intermittent, it's not constant.
That's right. Renewable energy is variable. And so what we need to do is create either a very diverse portfolio of generation assets and we need to firm the network with batteries. And so together, onshore renewables being onshore solar, wind and hydro with batteries, and offshore wind, which is bulk electricity. And we're talking the same scale of electricity generation as a coal-fired power plant, which is one offshore wind project. So together, these things mean that we can power not only our communities, but our industry and future economies as well.
Okay, that's important. Now, you said your platforms are off the coast of New South Wales. So are these state government or federal government initiatives, or is it the private sector developing them?
So the offshore wind industry has been pioneered by the private industry. And so we have been working on the ground for almost a decade to get offshore wind up in Australia. Offshore wind is not new to the rest of the world. If you've been to Denmark or off the coast of Scotland in the UK, there are offshore wind turbines already generating electricity for different countries around the world. And so for Australia, now we have a regulatory and a legislation process in place. The Australian government issues the licenses for projects to develop projects off the coast, but then the electricity is sent onshore. And so that's when the state governments play a role in things like ports, transmission infrastructure, and all of the workforce that's required, because you build an offshore wind farm from the local port.
Okay, and so you connect the port to the wind farm. So that's...
The port services as the assembly and construction base. Yeah. And often you need upwards of 3,000 construction workers to assemble and tow out these large infrastructure projects. But the electricity hits the state grid. And so, for example, in New South Wales, our first project is off the coast of the Hunter or the Newcastle region, and that's where we will see bulk coal exits from the retiring coal-fired power stations exit the electricity market. And so we look for places where we can plug in bulk offshore wind projects.
Okay. So from what you're saying, sounds like we need a very important infrastructure to make this happen. And that's coincidentally how I came across your name. So I saw there was this major panel, this discussion organised by the Australian Financial Review, and I saw this name, Emily Scivetti. So tell us about the infrastructure issues that you're either facing or we need to implement to keep on generating more renewable energy.
So offshore wind projects are very large, nationally significant infrastructure projects. They cost at least $10 billion to build. And so what this means is we also need the infrastructure at port to bring in these large pieces of equipment and assemble the turbines before we have a huge vessel fleet of marine workers and boats to tow out these wind turbines 20 kilometres out to sea, where they are hooked up to a mooring and anchor system at sea. And so typically for what we call a 2 gigawatt project or a 2,000 megawatt capacity offshore wind project, we will require at least 130 offshore wind turbines. These turbines are steel structures floating in the ocean, 260 meters tall, and they have wind turbine blades of 120 meters. So they are large assets further out to sea. And so we will typically bring all the equipment at port, assemble the project, and then tow out the wind turbines before they're hooked up. And the electricity is generated through a substation at sea.
Okay, and your company is doing which part of this whole process?
So OceanX Energy is an early phase developer. That means we look for the correct locations, we advocate government to start the regulatory process, and we also attract international investors. You need the international experts and technical expertise from around the globe to build these very complex projects. OceanX Energy partnered with Norway's Equinor in 2022. This is Norway's largest company, offshore oil and gas legacy, and also 2/3 owned by the Norwegian government. So they have the technical expertise and the operational experience from their offshore oil and gas platforms, and they are transitioning their business into renewables. You need this expertise as well as the large balance sheet to support these very expensive projects.
Yes, okay, so you help bring together the parties to the group.
That's right. We bring together the investors and we show them how to build and enter the market as Australian local experts in infrastructure development. And so once we get a feasibility license from the government, Equinor as the project owner and operator will take lead of the project. And so it's the party that is most appropriate to the project phase, which leads.
Okay, so you've already mentioned the Commonwealth government, federal government, then the state government. And I guess coordinating them is not always obvious. How do you see the outlook? Because we often hear how the industry's been kept back a lot because of lack of government attention in the past. What are you seeing now?
So government plays a very important role as a coordinator, as a signal giver, and also often provides revenue support for new projects. And so we have the federal government who issues licenses to project developers because the projects are located in Commonwealth waters, but the electricity and the electricity consumers and all of the jobs will fall to the state. So the state government's role is very important to set those targets and that strategy for what sort of renewable energy it wants to rely on, how much they intend to use. And so what that means is that investors and the supply chain have that clarity and certainty of policy so they can invest. And the longer time that they have to invest, the more jobs and local content will come back to Australia.
Okay. And you can see a clear policy set up at the moment and looking ahead.
Right now, we have the onshore electricity infrastructure roadmap in New South Wales. We do not have a position from the state government in offshore wind. We understand the New South Wales government is looking at generating policy to support the Commonwealth offshore wind policy. But we look to Victoria as the leaders right now in state policy. They have clear energisation targets. So I think they're aiming for 9 gigawatts of offshore wind by 2040 installed. Now, that is a very clear signal to the investor market on how big and when they want this technology installed. And so that means local businesses and suppliers and fabricators and manufacturers can make a decision as to whether they want to support an offshore wind industry in the state.
Okay. And not asking for a political comment, but do the recent events in the United States have a bearing on what might happen? We're hearing that Donald Trump isn't so keen on renewables.
Yes, we're yet to see that, Antonio. And so I think what we'll be looking for is signals as to whether the Inflation Reduction Act in the US is kept on track, or I understand it's very difficult to unwind policy in the US. And so the US Biden government was very firm on its targets for renewable energy and all of the policies to enable manufacturing in the US and all the investment required to build out a renewable energy workforce. We will watch with interest as investors will either maintain their commitments in the US or look to back out. And I think it's an important case study for Australia about the importance of government when it comes to signalling their commitment to transitioning to renewables.
Okay. Yes. Well, there's a lot to be understood there, both internationally and in the local context. Fine. And I guess I hope we keep on pursuing the renewable energies, if nothing else, to expand the options that we had. Now, just before we go on to understand where this name Scivetti comes from, you mentioned some sizes of these wind farms. Just give us an idea what will they power? How do they compare to other power stations, for example?
So a typical coal-fired power station in New South Wales is capable of generating up to 2,000 megawatts or 2 gigawatts of energy. And so that is the equivalent of one offshore wind farm or the project that we're developing. I've just had the drilling start, so I just might move.
I couldn't hear it.
And so offshore wind farm is essentially the equivalent of a coal-fired power plant, which means that they can provide bulk electricity. So when it comes to industrial users like Tomago aluminium, BlueScope steel, they require a lot of energy and all times of the day. And that's why offshore wind is important. So we can keep Australian manufacturers with power throughout the day.
Cool. Okay. Well, that sounds very impressive. And it's very impressive that you're part of that AFR event and the financial review. So now let's go to this name Scivetti. Tell us about your Italianness. Where does this Scivetti come from?
So when I was 17, I met a gentleman called Fabiano Scivetti, and I have been with the Scivetti family for over 20 years, and his family originated in Giovinazzo, in Puglia, and so it's the Italian side through my husband. So a shout out to all the Scivettis in New South Wales. I consider myself an honorary Italian, even though I have English and Chinese roots.
Yes, well, I've discovered there are several Scivettis in New South Wales, in Australia. Have you been? Have you visited Giovinazzo or Italy?
Yes, we were lucky enough to travel to Italy with my 8-year-old daughter last year. We stayed in Giovinazzo for 10 days and we ate panzerotti most
Okay.
days and went swimming. But it was a beautiful, beautiful place to be.
Yes, it's a lovely town. It turns out I have relatives in Giovinazzo too, and some with that same surname, although we haven't found a connection yet. Um, yes. So you said English and Chinese background is yours.
That's right. I'm the first Australian in my family to be born in Wollongong. My mother came to Australia as a 10-pound pom in 1947. And my father emigrated from New Zealand, but through uh, Chinese heritage. And so I grew up in Wollongong and have worked in New South Wales all my life. But we look forward to traveling to Italy as much as we can. Um, and we spend a lot of time at Nonna's house. She's from Napoli.
Okay. Now, the way you've pronounced some of those words, Jesse, actually, you probably do speak a little bit of Italian at least, or you
I
understand
quickly
it.
learned that I needed to study Italian at university so I could
Yeah.
understand if people were talking about me at family occasions. But I'm
Um,
very gun shy.
yes, that's right. So, which part of China does your
My father's
family?
family is from the south, Guangzhou. I often
Yeah,
joke about it with my husband because his family is from the south,
yes,
from a farming family, and also mine is from a farming family, also from the south of China. So together, I think we've dominated the international food uh, landscape with southern China and southern Italy.
yes, lovely. Okay, and now is your daughter speaking any of those languages?
My husband has spoken to my daughter in Italian since she was 6 weeks old, and
Beautiful.
we have a weekly Italian tutor come to our house. And so she's an Italian citizen, and perhaps she will choose to go to university in Florence so I can take her lunch every day.
Oh, beautiful. Oh, well, maybe you should try to get some Mandarin in there at some point, a little bit. 'Cause children are really, really good at learning languages. Well, thank you very much, Emily, for coming on to Radio Italiano today and giving us this update on where you see the infrastructure developing in Australia for these offshore wind farms. And congratulations for doing such huge work. Keep it up.
Thank you so much, Antonio. It's been a pleasure chatting to you. And yeah, we hope that we can develop offshore wind in Australia. And it's also happening in Italy as well. So keep an eye out for that off the coast of Italia.